In this session, we will be looking at using NVivo to help with literature review. We have three aims for this session. First of all, using NVivo as a basic storage container to help you maintain and keep your literature. Secondly, using NVivo as a tool to help with the analysis of your literature. And thirdly, looking at how your analysis and how you can alter or adjust your process of analysis so that it relates closely to your literature review methodology, i.e. how we would look at a literature review methodology, such as, say, a systematic review process, and look at those stages and then operationalize those within NVivo. In addition, this session will allow you to practice opening a project, importing PDFs, coding, auto-coding, and making framework matrices. In other words, it will allow you to practice doing what you've done before or in the last session, and also look at making framework matrices, which are really useful for literature review. In fact, what we will do is to start with some literature, practice auto-coding it, and then we will try to make automatic summaries of that literature. How good is it? Well, that's something you have to look at in detail for yourselves, but certainly there are some very nifty ways of extracting some key information from the text, from those papers, using this technology. And we will be working in conjunction with EndNote or Mendeley with your reference managing package to export an EndNote library and import that into NVivo. So this is a really useful way that we can start working with literature in NVivo. You don't need to start from scratch if you've got an EndNote library or an alternative reference manager library. If you have your papers already as PDFs within that library, if they're already there, it's very easy to import them, and all the information, all the referencing information about them into NVivo. Okay, if you don't use that system, then it's an opportunity for you to start to think about doing so. We would say it's far easier to work within a reference managing software such as EndNote library and develop your library there and import it than it is to add all the referencing information manually in NVivo. It can be done, and nothing's stopping you doing it that way. That's just our recommendation. And obviously most of you will already be using such a reference managing software, and so there's no point in duplicating. So we have a process here. We're going to start with importing literature and look at that in a minute. Then go on to classify sources, like how we might assign attributes like author or publication date. We will then look at coding and annotating the literature and how we would then go on and query the results, such as running word frequencies, for instance, on the data. And we'll also look at the creation of externals. If you have a reference software managing system, such as EndNote, and you've kept your references but not the actual PDFs of the literature of those journals within the reference managing system, you will find that when you import into NVivo, that NVivo will create externals and external references rather than going into the internal aspect of the package. Okay, so we assume we're using EndNote because the University of Manchester supports EndNote. And there are many training courses in the library as well on how to use EndNote. So we'd export a .xml file from EndNote to NVivo. A few stages here. So we would start by opening EndNote and then select the articles that you wish to explore. From the File menu, select Export. In the new window, name the file, e.g. NVivo literature from EndNote. Browse the location, e.g. desktop, and change the save as type to .xml and click Save. If you're using Mac, the file can be seen as .xml. Right, so we want to import a .xml EndNote file into NVivo. We'll start by opening NVivo, and from the Import tab, select EndNote. A new window will open. Browse the location and select My EndNote Library.xml and click Open. The upload will finish in a few minutes. If your EndNote library does not contain the systematic Okay, so when you get to the exercises, but just watch for now, we'll be using the training project.mvp or .mvpx if you're using Mac. And you'll see that we've imported a few documents for you to work on. The important thing here is that you can see that 3 have got a reference classification. Those 3 have been imported from EndNote and automatically be given a reference classification. The 9.l article we've imported manually. There's no such reference, and that would mean you would need to assign the reference classification and then populate the field related to 9 on the classification sheet. Another reason why it's easiest if you import from EndNote. It saves a lot of work. Okay, if within the EndNote file there's no actual file PDF of the journal article or other document, come to that, when you import into NVivo, NVivo will locate it within the externals. Okay, so it would go to externals rather than if you'd clicked on the literature folder, going into that literature folder as an internal document within NVivo. So if your document is imported into the externals, i.e. the actual document, the actual journal article is not imported into NVivo, you'll find that automatically NVivo takes the abstract and makes that into a memo, as we have an example here. So that the memo, it's taken from notes. What it thinks is the abstract. Usually it's the abstract, but as you can see, it's not always abstract. It's taken these as notes. But that can be quite useful. And you can then work on those memos in the usual way there. We've spent some time looking at importing of literature. We'll now move on to classifying the sources. So the reference classification sheet is automatically generated when you import a library from EndNote. And you can see that here. So the reference classification there is a book, the author, the year, the title, etc. Some might be unassigned because that information isn't there in the EndNote, and we'll have a look at the full list of fields contained within that reference classification before long. Okay, so this is done automatically. Okay, so what we see here is another format for looking at the classification. So we're looking at reference classification, and you can see then a number of fields, or what in NVivo we would term attributes. So the reference type, if that's a book, or if it's a journal article, for instance, or other kind of documents. There are many different attributes here. If you don't want all of them, it's fine. You can delete, or you can just live with them. Some might remain unpopulated, entirely your choice. The main thing though is when you end up adding manually, as you're very likely to do for at least a few of your sources, literature sources, is that you use the same reference classifications. You just assign that document to be a reference. If you end up making alternative file classifications for your manually imported literature, it can cause problems later when you start to do searches. So definitely recommend that you use the one that is created from the literature when you've imported that manually, if you choose to do it that way. Okay, so classifying sources, if you've used EndNote, would be very easy, and it's just a case of having a look to see, well, what has NVivo done? Where are the classifications found? How do I look at them, etc. That becomes very easy. So we now move on to code and annotate. And remember now, what you're doing is to code and annotate your data, and your data in this case in a literature review are your journal articles or other literature sources. So we've created a number of nodes, made a number of nodes, and I thought carefully about what kind of nodes would be useful for literature review. So we've got aims and focus. So this is where you would take the text that relates to in the paper to the description of the aims and focus of that paper. And then research methods were broken down into a number of findings or contribution to literature in relation to methods, epistemology, methodology, research questions. So under research questions, for instance, where the paper states their research questions, you would just code that as research questions. Where they mention their sample size, the sample size of that paper, not talking about some other paper, the paper that you're reviewing, then you'd put that under that text under sample size, along with, say, any justifications for that sample size. Any attrition, for instance, could go under that section. But we also then are looking at research gap or research recommendations. So if the paper talks about, they identify at the end of their paper research gap, then you can put that text there, or any implications and research recommendations arising from that particular study. Themes, that's where you'd need to do a bit more work. So we'd expect that if you're conducting either a content or thematic analysis of your literature, probably a thematic analysis, you'd end up coming up with a number of themes, and therefore you'll probably want to then make some sub-themes as well. And that's up to you. So you'd just right click and make a new node or sub-node that comes off themes. And you might want to change that so that you're giving the theme the name that relates to your literature review. But we've given you a basic template from which you can start. Okay, so you have the training project.mvp, and that's the one you'll be using in this session. However, you may want to track other features such as the geographical, historical, or socio-political changes in your literature. And if that's the case, then just simply add nodes. So you can extend the literature nodes, literature review nodes, add in social, political, historical, geographical as other nodes. Okay, so as you're reading through your literature, because we still have to read the literature, you may come across some quotations or potential quotations that could become quotations, I should say, in your future literature review. And if that's the case, we'd just recommend that you make NVivo codes of those. So remembering that NVivo code is a code that is named the exact wording of the text. So make a number of NVivo codes where you're capturing your what we might call key potential quotations for later use. A little later, I'll be demonstrating to you some of the features and working through the training.mvp and the exercises that you'll then be practicing yourself. And so you'll get a chance to try auto-coding on your documents, and just try auto-coding and see if you get helpful output. And one tip is that if you are coding, code on groups of documents that are on a common theme. If you've got a very diverse set of literature and all kinds of topics, you might not get such a helpful response when you use auto-coding. But if you've, say, divided your literature into a number of sub-themes with more focus to that sub-theme, auto-coding can be very, very fruitful. Really, really good. Okay, the matrices features, various matrix features available in NVivo can be very helpful in literature review. We're going to look at one shortly. We're going to auto-code themes, but then we're going to auto-summarize using framework matrices. Okay, so we'll demonstrate that to you later and also provide a number of short videos that you can view at your leisure. Okay, so we will be doing more work on classification sheets in the next session. Call that advanced NVivo, but it's really looking at classification sheets, and we'll go on and look at cases in a lot of detail next session. And cases are really, really important and help you to really accelerate your use and understanding of NVivo. So it would take your NVivo on to the next level. Okay, but that's next week. For now, we'll restrict ourselves to auto-summarizing and framework matrices. So you can make the framework matrices if you want to make comparative summaries of a number of academic articles, for instance. It's something to explore. You may not want to solely rely on the automatic analysis, and you can add to it, or you can reject the automatic analysis and go for your own manual analysis as you manually create a framework matrix. However, definitely say look at the automatic means as a way to get started, and sometimes it can be very, very fruitful for you to take that route and very efficient. Okay, if you click on the link below, you will find a great short video on making framework matrices. And the last couple of minutes of that video will demonstrate to you how to auto-summarize the matrices. So if you're working independently from this PowerPoint, if you stop the PowerPoint now and view, spend a few minutes just watching that particular video. It will be useful, I think. Okay, so a couple of videos for you to watch. For framework matrices, please see it's a couple of minutes or so in the video link here. So if you open up the slides, you're able to just click on this and it should take you to the video. So you need to start at 3611 for about 2.5 minutes to see a framework matrix being made. Also for node matrices, again, we've got about 4 minutes of video there. So link that NVivo for your literature review online tutorial. A couple taken from YouTube, but they're quite good, so just look at the little extracts that we're recommending, and that should be helpful. And similarly, 2 more videos, not suggesting you watch all of them. You've got some short clips there, one on framework matrices and one on node matrices. So just look at the short time clips that we've recommended to you there, please. And again, you can do that now. Okay, so we've looked at coding of the literature. And really we've got quite a simple structure that you have your literature in literature files that you import into literature files and subfolders. And you've then got a nice coding structure that you can use to collect key information about that as you go through and read, because of course this doesn't stop you reading, even though you can go a long way with auto-coding. Okay, so let's link now to literature review methodology. So basically what we need to do is to develop the system, the structure of the nodes, so that they relate to each of the stages in your systematic review. So we've looked before at Boland et al. And their stages, and that's a good one to look at. And basically we might create classification sheets that match the stages. We'll look a little bit more in how to do some of this in the next session, but I want to just come back to this a bit later. In some ways you don't want your systematic review process to be too complicated. We try and make the systems, the review process, and then the node systems as straightforward as possible. Parsimonious, parsimonious I think is the word. So while the matrix framework matrices do a lot for you in terms of analysis, you're not restricted to using those. You don't have to use them at all. You can also practice running queries, word frequency queries, other matrices that we will look at, other kinds of matrices, node matrices that we'll look at in the next session. And you can use various charts as well. So that's something that you can explore. You know, we've done the basis of that already, so you just explore that, but you're using the literature as your data rather than the interview transcripts. Okay, and another recommended video clip for you to look at. So if you stop the slideshow and have a look at and watch that video now, we'd say from 38 minutes 41 in the video. And you can look at the part about using charts to help you scope your review. Please do that now. Okay, and a little reminder from last session. Remember, when you use memos, that only one memo can be linked to an internal or external document. However, you can have as many freestanding memos as you like. Now, so you need to go back to the guide from the previous session. As you know, we are recommending using EndNote, but there's also the Mendeley facility. But please note that EndNote Web doesn't import into NVivo, so you'd have to use EndNote rather than EndNote Web. And there are instructions on how to install and how to use EndNote on the Blackboard for this use. And if you need to do so and you're wanting now to install EndNote onto a personal computer or laptop, there's some instructions here, so you can stop the presentation and follow those when you're ready. Okay, so there's some workshop exercises for you to have a go at, and just run through these quickly here. But before you get going on it, we will be giving you a demonstration, which you'll be able to view in a different video. Okay, so you'll be using the resources we've provided already on the pen drive and on Blackboard. And you'll be using the NVivo training project, an EndNote library, a few journal articles, and the exercise sheets that we've called the workbook, but that's the exercise sheets. Okay, so just to quickly run through what you're going to be doing, you're going to open the training project file and explore it. To look at the structure of the project, look at the file structure, look at the node structure, look at the classifications, and then consider how these three elements connect. I want you to consider how the node structure might be linked to your literature review methodology. Once you're happy with A, we'll move on to B, and you can import from EndNote. Don't worry if you've not got your own EndNote file. Halima's kindly made an EndNote file that you can use for this purpose. So you can then import literature from EndNote to NVivo, check the classifications that are made, and if any articles are not classified as journal articles, you can assign that classification. And so basically you're going to practice coding using the node system we provided and described earlier. You're going to autocode the literature files using the themes option within autocode, and you're going to look at the autocoded nodes and consider how you might use theme within literature review. We will then ask you to create a framework matrix using the autocodes and perhaps try auto-summarizing the framework matrix. To explore a framework matrix and practice using queries. So a tip, choose a few papers for the rows and then select a few of the autocoded nodes for the columns. And choose autocoded nodes with a higher number of references. So it's just a practice here. And a reminder that if you have questions during the week, we have the discussion board on Blackboard, so please add your questions there so Halima and I can monitor those and respond before the next session. Okay, so before you get on and do the exercises yourselves, please do view the next video where you'll see a demonstration. Basically a demonstration of the exercise that you'll be conducting yourself very shortly.